Welcome to the Futurati podcast. Any member of the Futurati is somebody who believes in the power of the future. We know there's a better world ahead, and we indeed have the power to make it so. In our podcast, we talk to the best minds in the world about the most urgent problems facing mankind today, and we hope you learn as much from them as we do. I'm Thomas Fry, a professional futurist and keynote speaker.
And I'm Trent Fowler, a machine learning engineer and author. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati podcast. Tonight, we're joined by Elaine Pofeldt, who is an independent journalist and speaker specializing in careers and entrepreneurship. In 2018, she published a well-received book called The $1 Million One-Person Business: Make Great Money, Work the Way You Like, Have the Life You Want, where she looks at how entrepreneurs are scaling to $1 million in revenue prior to hiring any employees. If you enjoy this interview, please don't forget to like the episode and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Elaine, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Trent.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to write about this particular sector?
Sure. Well, I'm an entrepreneurship journalist. I've been covering entrepreneurship, startups, that sort of thing for many years. And I came across this trend in writing my blog for Forbes. I write 5 posts a month, and I was running out of ideas for that month. And I started searching around for ideas on something I could cover. And I came across the Census Bureau's non-employer statistics, which sound really boring, and they are if you don't really analyze them, but they're about businesses with no payroll. And I was poking around and I noticed that there was an uptick in the number of businesses with no employees that were getting into the $1 to $2.49 million range. And I thought that's kind of interesting because being a journalist, I had hired a lot of freelancers, worked with graphic designers, a lot of solo entrepreneurs. They weren't getting to $1 million in revenue. So I thought, what are they actually doing? And the way they break it down in the Census Bureau is by the industry code. It's called the NAICS code. So there's one for manufacturing, one for professional services, et cetera. And then they have subcodes for the engineering professional services business, for instance. And what was really interesting was it was across the board. It wasn't confined to just e-commerce. In fact, professional services is one of the big ones. And this was back in 2013. I posted a very statistics-driven story because you can't find out from the Census Bureau who the entrepreneurs actually are, because when you fill out those forms, it's confidential. And the post went viral, and people started writing to me and saying, Elaine, that was really a cliffhanger. You didn't tell us any of the people who are doing this. I need to start $1 million one-person business. I need to know specifically what they're doing. And so I wrote a few more posts about the data because that's all I had. And in some of the posts, I said, if you are one of these entrepreneurs, please write to me because people are very curious about what you're doing. So they started writing to me, and it was over the course of about a year. I heard from 5, and then I wrote this post where I profiled them. And Alan Walton, who founded Spy Guy, was one of the first ones. He had an online spy camera store. So like if you had an elderly parent and you're worried about the caregiver, maybe elder abuse or something like that, those kind of cameras. There was Rachel Charlupsky. She ran the babysitting company, which she started it as a college student in Arizona, managed it from a BlackBerry, and she had like 2,500 babysitters that were, they provided babysitting at events. So if, for instance, a sports team was at an arena and their wives wanted to watch the game and they brought their kids, they would have on-site childcare. And then there was someone who had a newsletter. He was a financial planner. There was Dan Mazuritsky, who is a fitness trainer. He was licensing out his method of training people to other trainers. And so that post went really viral, like nothing I've ever written. I worked at Fortune Small Business Magazine, so we had quite a few viral stories, but this was like my biggest one ever. And I thought, wow, that's super interesting, right? Because when you've written thousands of stories, which one really connects with people? So then every time I found one of these people, I would I would write about them, and I kept learning more about them and their habits. And then that ultimately led to an agent seeing all those posts and suggesting that I write a book. And I wrote the $1 Million One Person Business for Random House in January of 2018.
Wow.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
So
Great story.
it's pretty hard to imagine a $1 million one person business 40 years ago. So what is it in the current technological landscape that makes something like this possible?
Oh, there's a lot of different moving parts changing at the same time, Trent. The cost of technology has come down a lot. And so you'll see a lot of businesses that once would have had to buy a server don't have to do that anymore because of cloud-based technologies. For people who are really young, they don't remember that. But I remember when it changed, and venture capitalists would say they don't want to back certain companies because they don't need that much money anymore. And it was because of the servers going away. So it means that the barrier to entry that was keeping a lot of people out of this has come down. But when you think about it, mobile phones, websites, everybody has the ability to get those. They're very either inexpensive or free. And you have the ability to get help very easily. You don't necessarily have to hire an employee or hire somebody where you live and work. You could go on Upwork or Freelancer or People Per Hour or a specialized engineering site and get the talent you need. And it's very low commitment.
Plus, you have the ability to advertise on social media and on Google and doing Google ads. Those kind of transitions have happened in the last couple decades here, which have made it quite appealing to a lot more people. I ran across this is over 10 years ago, but we ran across a taxi driver down in Orlando, and he had started a pizza business, but he didn't own a pizza store or anything. And all he did is he created a business name and put out flyers, and he hung them all over in the hotels, put them everywhere. And then if he got an order that came in, he had housewives throughout the city, and he would just call them up, have them bake the pizza, and then he would deliver it. And this is it's actually interesting because during COVID, we've seen some of these ghost kitchens crop
Oh,
up,
yeah.
and it's similar, but he was kind of leading the pack there, which I always thought that was intriguingly entrepreneurial of him.
Oh, absolutely, Thomas. It's interesting that you bring that up because that has been a game changer, is the access to social media. So if people are doing something that works, they can amplify it very easily. You take out a Facebook ad, it works, and then just throw more money at it. Then all of a sudden you're in front of a much bigger audience. There are other things that have happened too. For instance, one of the categories that some of the businesses are in is manufacturing. It used to be that you had to have your own plant to be a manufacturer. You'd
Yeah.
need to have connections to get the resources. Now you just go on Alibaba. You can be a manufacturer from your living room. If you're doing a food product, you get a co-packer. You don't really have to have the infrastructure yourself. And a lot of this is from digital. Another thing that has changed is the sharing of information. There's so many podcasts, communities, WhatsApp chats. I mean, there's so many different ways that people are educating each other. That information wasn't available before to people. So now the everyday person can get it. And there are a lot of people that maybe don't realize that they have entrepreneurial talent, but when they're exposed to these things and they listen to a podcast and they've always had a business idea, but now they know a little bit about how to get it started from hearing about somebody else. That's a game changer. And I think we keep finding with each generation, the younger generations are becoming more entrepreneurial. I don't know that they're necessarily more entrepreneurial in their DNA than any other generation. It's just that they've had so much exposure and it's so much easier to break into it that more people are trying it. And it's really transforming the working world.
It really is, because a lot of young people don't want to be told what to do, so they start their own business.
Absolutely.
Why should they be told what to do? I mean, it's an interesting thing because there are a lot of things that we assumed coming up in the workplace that had to be true, like the boss cracking the whip and everybody sitting in an office in their cubicles, and you got to work your way up
The
and
Dilbert,
pay your dues, all that stuff.
the Dilbert life pathway.
Yeah, why does it have to be that way? I mean, it serves the people on top, it doesn't serve everybody else. Why can't it be collaborative? And I think you have really young people asking that question, and not necessarily even young people. A lot of people are asking the question, and now they don't have to go along with it. They can have their own business and run it the way they want. And I'm working on my next book, Tiny Business, Big Money, and I'm in the middle of one of the chapters about how people are organizing their businesses. And Tiny Business, Big Money looks at businesses the next stage beyond the $1 million one-person business. They have small teams, so it could be a few employees. In some cases, they have a large group of contractors that are almost quasi-employees, where it's a little more of a cohesive team, not just like sending something out to the designer and then they get it. They're interacting with each other. And they do things differently. Some of them don't have any meetings. Some of them conduct the whole business on Slack. And as I've been interviewing them and fact checking, it's really opened my eyes to all the different ways you can run a business. You don't have to run it like it's General Motors if it's your 3-person business. And that's so refreshing to me, because that old system of working was making people sick. I mean, with stress and just literally sick from, sitting at their desk all day. And it's so unhealthy. It's so much better for people, I think, to run businesses in these freer, looser ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I want to get into that. But one question I had was that it's interesting to me that some solo entrepreneurs are having so much success in manufacturing. So you brought that up as well. I was wondering if you could walk us through a case study. It's just sort of hard for me to imagine starting a manufacturing company in Boulder and outsourcing the manufacturing. Are they flying to China? You probably have a couple of case studies, and I wonder if you might walk us through one of the more interesting ones.
Sure. Well, one really interesting one, I just reconnected with her for Tiny Business. Her name is Anna Gavia, and she's a woman in her 20s. She was a medical student in Australia, and she always loved sketching. And she decided she wanted to make a little extra money, and she decided to create her own bikini company, in part because she only had $200 to invest in the business as a student, and she couldn't afford the fabric for a dress. So she sketches this one bikini, and she goes online and she researches manufacturing plants, and she calls around. She is a med student, so she's good at research, finds one that says they will do a sample for her on her budget and is willing to do a small run if she can get any orders. So then they make the one sample in a size medium. She puts it up on Instagram, on an Instagram ad, and has set up a little Shopify store so that she can take money in to take orders. So she gets 100 orders for the bikini.
Wow.
Then she has the money from the women who bought the bikini to pay the manufacturer, and she does a little run. So this is how she's built the whole business. It's now over $1 million business. And each bikini, she tests it on her audience. So she doesn't waste any money making bikinis that she fell in love with, but no one else wants to wear. And I thought, that's amazing, right? She's only in her 20s, had no startup capital whatsoever except the $200. And now she's got this business. It's in Australia and the United States, and she has unlimited potential to grow that. And it's a whole new way of doing business.
It's almost like crowdsourcing the idea. It's so if you order this, then I can afford to pay the manufacturer to print more of them. And so it's like you're creating a market almost.
Yeah, you too can be in the bikini business.
Yeah, right.
You can do it with a lot of different products. It's just making sure that there's actually demand. It's taking some of the risk out of it, because that's what keeps people from starting businesses: fear of risk. Nobody likes to waste their own money, right? It's hard to earn money if you had a job, especially, and you earned it that way. So this avoids that.
So let me try this. I talk a lot about it in my presentation about the coming wave of micro industries, and one of the topics I explain is that we're going to take existing industries and they're going to splinter off into a lot smaller niche industries. So let's take, for example, the shoe industry. Every year, 21 billion pair of shoes are sold around the world. That's roughly 3 pair of shoes for every person on the planet. And so my speculation is that in just a few years, you'll be able to take your smartphone and scan your foot and get a three-dimensional representation of what your foot looks like. You'll be able to send that in to a shoe manufacturer. It needs to be a lot of mom and pop shops that specialize just in shoes for people that play lacrosse or people that are mountain climbers or people that are amputees or left-handed or play organ or something that is unique and different. And these mom and pop shoes are going to embed features like extra sensors into it. They'll have pores that open and close in expanding polymeric gel packs that make it so you're perfectly comfortable all the time. So you can buy these hyper individualized shoes for $300 to $400 a pair, and for a mom and pop business, you only need to sell a few thousand a year, and you're well off on $1 million trail there. That's one that I've been speculating on.
I think that started to take off a little bit. It's like, I think it's called mass customization, where you'll have like certain shirt companies have done that type of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
you're talking about a more advanced level of it, but it definitely seems like that's on the horizon, and there's a lot of opportunity to be a niche player. I mean, that's what I've seen with these folks. They're really niching down. One of the other companies that I found really fascinating, Julian O'Hayan, he does something, it's called Black Paris, but it's BL and it's like a VCK Paris. And he had started the business with a partner who was in Australia. He was in Belgium at the time. And he started just doing Black iPhone cases, and he built up a little following on Instagram. He was a designer, and he would put up pictures of like Black M&Ms or just iconic things, built a following around that. Then he started selling these products. They were very simple. Then he started doing his own streetwear brand. And when I spoke with him this week, what he had done was branched out from selling the streetwear online to a partnership with these different store companies they'll actually run the store, and they take a cut in his sales. He doesn't have to own the store. He doesn't have to have employees. He just supplies the merchandise.
Right.
And they order it. It's all automated. They order it from his online site for merchants. So he's got like a very low burden in terms of structure of the business. And he's been financing growth by doing digital products, which have a very low cost. So like on your iPhone screen, you know how it has a certain look and feel. There's a way I don't know the name of it, but you can upload something that makes it look pretty, and so of course he uploaded it with his Black Paris designs, and people pay money for that. And he sells it in multiples. So that's bringing money coming in so that he can expand the company. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, right? Like he's come up with something. He's obviously got the design talent. People will pay him money for that. But now gives him an engine to finance this whole brand. And when you think about the old brands of the past, right? Like what it would take. I used to, at one point, I was a fashion editor at Women's Wear Daily. And all those fashion designers would, it was very hard for them to get financing. Right. To get, or to get into a store, then to get paid by the store, and they'd be waiting 90 days, and it's completely changed the game so that, this guy and his buddy who the other partner was 20 years old, they can do something really big with their business. And it's very niche. It's, it's just all Black stuff.
Right. Right.
So a lot of what's driven this is the rise of new technology. So cloud computing, which obviates the need to rent a bunch of servers, and social media, which obviates the need to have a huge marketing budget. Have you thought anything about how something like 3D printing or some of the other new technologies might impact this trend?
Well, that definitely can impact the trend. I mean, any new means of production is relevant to this, because if the cost of producing things is coming down, and everyday people, like we have a 3D printer in our house that my kids use, if the average person can get it, then the average person can be creative with it. And there's really unlimited uses once people put their creativity towards it. So I think these new technologies are only, it's not even that new anymore. They're only going to increase this trend. And when people see one person doing things, then other people will do it. I mean, that's one reason I don't really feel like it's mandatory that everybody has to get to 1 million in revenue. But I did think it was important to share that information with people that it's possible, because it's like the 4-minute mile, right? People
Right.
wouldn't attempt to run the 4-minute mile if they didn't think it was humanly possible. But once you know that it is, then you could say, well, that's actually a reasonable goal. Let me see what I can do to get to that point. And don't forget, if you're bringing in 1 million in revenue, depending on the industry, maybe you're bringing home between $200,000 and $400,000 after all your costs are paid, your taxes are paid, et cetera. So you're not making tons and tons of money. You're earning a substitute for a very good corporate job.
Yeah, $400,000 a year is not bad.
Yeah, not bad
It's
at
not
all.
bad, but it's not. It's not the. Sometimes people think it's like you're taking home 1 million.
Right.
You know, they forget there are costs to these businesses.
Yeah, it occurs to me that every emerging technology is going to have their first $1 million solopreneur. the Every VR, AR application, every autonomous vehicle that comes out, every flying drone, every whether it's 3D printers or sensors or IoT devices, all of these are going to have their $1 million solopreneur. And I think that's really exciting.
You could have 3D printers to print the pizzas, and then an autonomous car to deliver them, and then one
I
up
love
your,
it.
your cab driver in Orlando.
Yeah. And then a robot to collect the money from the people and shake them down if they don't have the money. And
Right.
Well, some of it is it's surprisingly, it's technologically driven, but it's lower tech than one would think. One example, the book just came out in paperback in January, and one of the newer case studies is Steve Ferreira, who runs Ocean Audit, and he worked in corporate. He audited shipping bills. So if, say, J.C. Penney ordered, hundreds of thousands of shirts from overseas, and the shipping company made a mistake on the bill, he's the guy who would catch it. And so what his business is he goes to J.C. Penney. It's a public document. He can get these when they post these bills. It's public, so he'll find errors. Goes to J.C. Penney and says, "I found a $250,000 error. I will collect it for you, but you have to give me 50%."
Wow.
Right? So the company's getting found money. They're still getting $125,000. But it's a good business. He brings in almost $2 million a year. So he was doing that manually for years. Then it occurred to him, well, why don't I create a software to help me with this? Because he was a top expert in finding these errors. So he knew how to direct the developers. So now he's made the business easier to run. It's more scalable. And if someone, like, say he wanted to have a franchisee or something like that, with the software, they don't have to have the same knowledge that he has. And so sometimes it's things like that. Like, he's a professional services firm, right? He's an auditor, and he's made it into a tech firm, but it's still just him and his contractors.
yeah, generally, the way you scale a business is you leverage products or you leverage people. You can license some things or rent things, but generally it's done with leveraging people or products. And so to the extent that you don't want to manage a lot of people, then you leverage products, and that's generally the way it works. And if your product is a service, then you can go off in lots of different directions.
Well, it's hard with service businesses sometimes because you get into the whole trading time for dollars.
Right.
Right.
And it's where technology is helping people, because they can do things like create informational products, like a course. Now the course area is a little bit saturated, but there's, Kajabi and Teachable and Podia and a whole bunch of other platforms that are usable by an average person who might have professional knowledge of one subject area. So now they've got it's a kind of a tech-enabled service firm, And a lot of them who do well wind up getting away from providing the service because they feel they're getting their message out at scale, and they focus more on marketing the actual product. I saw a really good example of this. I had to write an article for creditcards.com. I write for them sometimes. And they sent me to this seminar. It was like a webinar about a really obscure change in credit card law. And it was these two attorneys in Washington, D.C. were holding the webinar. I had to pay like $300 to go to it. And so did everybody else. Well, I get there, there's 600 people on the call for 1 hour, right?
Wow.
And they're airing it again 2 other times for the same price. So now these two attorneys, no matter what their hourly rate was, it wasn't the same hourly rate they
Right.
were making for that. They had hired a webinar company, so there was some cost to that, but they were some of the leading experts on this area of credit card law. So now they were scaling the knowledge sharing in a way that was very, very lucrative. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of people that have that kind of knowledge of something that they kind of geek out on in their professional career. And if you can figure out what that thing is, and if people will pay you money, in this case, people needed to know about it. It was important to credit card transactions that they were making. And there was some compliance stuff where you'd get fined if you didn't follow the law. But if you have something like that and you do a webinar, it doesn't have to be a scammy, go to my 6 other webinars and you'll have a Maserati kind of webinar. It could be a serious one like these guys.
Right.
This was dull. It was a dull webinar, but it didn't matter. It was necessary information. And I think it's very empowering for people that are, it's hard running a professional services firm, people, working with so many clients day in, day out, juggling that with managing the business and everything else. So this is a way where you could get a quick hit. Maybe you make $20,000 extra from 5 or 10 hours of work preparing for the webinar. And then that's kind of game changing. What if you do it once a month? Once you get in a good routine with a webinar company, it doesn't have to be a webinar, it could be something else, but it's that whole concept of packaging your knowledge into a product. You could still run the service business. Another business that was really interesting to me, Steve Sudell. He's a physical therapist in California, and he's an athletic guy. He does CrossFit. He specializes in that area of physical therapy. He was a football player before, and he hurt his neck, and he still had neck pain. So he created this thing called the Neck Hammock. It's like literally a little hammock that like puts over a doorknob.
Yep.
And it's like a traction device. And he raised the money for it on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And he wound up building that into more than $1 million one-man business. And he just sold it, actually. I'm going to be writing an update story about it. But he built it quite a bit while still running the physical therapy practice. And he actually really loves physical therapy, and he just continued doing it. But it brought a whole new entrepreneurial dimension to his life. And he actually plans to continue doing physical therapy because he likes working with the patients. And it's also a good laboratory for other ideas. I think that's really just, it's very powerful to think that you can combine that, the serving of your customers with being an inventor or, a knowledge business.
Yeah, and in some of these cases, they're looking for talent in places that other people simply don't care to examine. So I didn't write the guy's name down, but he runs a business contracting out people who know how to handle hazardous materials. And a lot of his contractors are in their 60s and 70s. They're like older people kind of in the twilight of their careers, but they're not ready to be put out to pasture yet. They want to be out there, doing the job. And so when most people are preparing to be sort of pushed out the door in retirement, these guys are billing for $300 an hour to help these companies get rid of toxic materials. I thought that was really interesting as well.
Oh my gosh. Are you talking about in my book, the Chad Patchkey? Because it was a similar, actually, maybe it's a different book, different case study, but Chad Patchkey is a consultant who works in the oil and gas industry. Basically, he helps oil plants not blow up. Not
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very good thing. And so he has 5 children, and he wanted to have a business that, and I think he had like 4 in college at the same time. God bless him, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted to start a business that was going to bring in enough to meet his overhead. He brought in all these older consultants. They were all baby boomers who were kind of at the stage of life where they wanted to be able to travel and, scale back a little bit, not have all the stress of corporate. And it was the same thing. He was billing them out a minimum of $175 an hour, but his highest billing consultant is considered the kind of godfather of their industry. He's 75 years old. I think he billed him out at either $300 or $350 an hour.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And that was talent that when you look at corporate, there's so much age discrimination. It's rampant. People like that would have a number on their back, no matter how valuable they were. But he's like, no, these guys know their stuff, and they're extremely valuable in what we do. And money isn't that much of an object in their industry, because if an oil plant blows up, I mean, think about the repercussions of that.
Right.
They'll pay $300 an hour to have the best guy.
Yep.
And so I thought that was really brilliant, because these guys are smart. They're no less smart than they were when they were 40, but companies treat them that way. So that's something with the one-person business where they're all contractors too. And that was part of his thinking, was some of these guys have pensions and things like that. So he had a startup. So if he couldn't pay them in exactly 30 days in the beginning, he knew that they had other income coming in, and he would pay them, in 40 days maybe. But it took a little pressure off of him in a brand new business, because there's an unpredictable element. Like, you don't know, are your clients going to pay you on time, and what other expenses might there be in the business that you didn't think of until you're actually doing it. And
Right.
That's a very good business model. And there's so many people out there who are over, like in tech, people who are over 40 are basically discriminated against. So they're youthful, there's people of all ages that are able to work till very advanced ages today. I have one doctor who's 89 years old, who's one of my best doctors. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
Yeah, back in 1998, 99, there was a lot of entrepreneurs that got into the game of solving Y2K problems. And for corporations, anything that came through that had Y2K on it got rubber stamped and passed through, because nobody wanted to get caught with their pants down. And so there was a lot of fly-by-night operations that just came out of the woodwork, promising to solve all the Y2K problems. And it must have worked, because we didn't have a Y2K problem.
That sort of never materialized. I remember it was like this big panic, and then nothing ever happened from it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hype around the danger associated with it. Now, we're going to have a similar problem like that coming up with quantum computing, because we're going to have quantum computers that are going to be able to hack all encryption systems that we currently have. So we're going to have to upgrade all of our computers to have quantum encryption systems incorporated into them. So there may be a wave of entrepreneurs that jump into that one as well.
That's a good opportunity for listeners, right? If you have those skills.
That's true. Somebody should start a startup accelerator for quantum computing, and
Yeah,
help these
somebody
companies
should do
bring
that.
their products to market. What's the theoretical ceiling for one of these companies? So in your book, you interviewed Eric Scott, who's a principal at Founders Fund in San Francisco, and he routinely asks himself when a one-person firm is going to be acquired for $1 billion. So and it sounds like you're doing a book on tiny businesses as well, big money. So what do you think about that? Like, how high could someone go with a business like this?
I think about that a lot. I think it's unlimited, because we have ways now to, people say 10x, 100x, 1000x things that didn't exist before, and we don't really know what's coming. So in 5 or 10 years, who knows what methods of leveraging or amplifying things will exist.
So you're saying that if I offered you $1 billion, you'd sell your business right now?
I don't think you'd want it. It's a lot of work. But it's, I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question, I mean, the other thing is new types of businesses might come about, like we have AI and machine learning and other types of technologies that might become very accessible to the average person. And once that happens, similar to like the iPhone and the website, right? Like everybody takes those things for granted, but those were not available to the average person years ago. They just weren't. And I mean, you couldn't make your business global years ago. That's the internet was what allowed people to go global. So who knows? I think we're going to see really interesting things going on in terms of very low numbers of people achieving very, very big things. And some people could say, well, oh, that's bad because now robots are taking our jobs. But I look at it a totally different way. I feel like this means that everybody who wants to can have their own business, and it's not confined to just the elite people who have access to capital. It means anybody can do it. And it means they can also opt out of systems that are not fair to them. So if you're an older worker and it's really not fair that you're 45 and you can't get a job in Silicon Valley, you don't have to be begging for a job. You can just start your own business and use your own knowledge and excel. And there's no ceiling on what you can do or who you can work with. Because when you have your own business, clients, I don't think they care about the same things as bosses do. They care if you can get the job done. Like
Right.
I like my
Right.
89-year-old doctor. He's a great doctor. I don't care what age he is. I just care that he's the best doctor, And so it's a completely different mindset, and it's very, very freeing for people. You can also work the way that you want. If you, like we saw with this whole pandemic, they were saying it's a women's recession. There are a lot of women with small children that were forced out of the workforce basically because of online school, and they just couldn't manage that on top of their jobs. Well, if you have your own business, you probably could, because you could flex things a little bit. You do some of your work on the weekend or do it at night. It's not ideal, but to get through a crisis,
Right.
you could do it and still have your income coming in and still be a good parent and be available to your small children if they need you. And to me, that's a tremendous liberating force.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of the broader cultural and political and economic ramifications of this trend? So if businesses can't age discriminate, then that will be a draining of some of the talent pool, right? As people start their own businesses, women might exit some of these bigger corporations to start their own companies. That might put some pressure on corporations to get their act together. Like how do you see this playing out? Have you given that any thought?
Well, I definitely think it's going to raise the bar for employers, because it used to be that employers were competing just against other companies for talent. But if you're competing against this whole other option of somebody working for themselves, making really good money, working the way they like, being able to go mountain biking in Boulder at lunchtime if they want to, and,
Yeah.
and living the way they want, the bar is pretty high
Yeah.
in terms of getting the best people. I mean, there are going to be people that say, I want to phone it in, like just give me a job on payroll. I don't really want to, invent new products. I just need a job, a day job, because I'm a musician at night or something like that.
Right.
I think you'll probably get the very, very ambitious people wanting to start their own businesses. Now, some people who are very ambitious do want to be on payroll because you need to be on a team to do what they do. So
Mhm.
you'll still get those people that really need to be part of a group in order to achieve the results that they want. But it definitely puts a little bit of pressure on employers. I do think it could be a force for diversity and inclusion, in terms of when people are discriminated against, they don't have to take it anymore, right? They could go out and start their own business and not deal with any of that. And you see that women and people of color are the fastest growing groups of people starting businesses. I don't think that's an accident. I think people realize their lifespan is a certain length of time, and progress is happening, but it's very glacial. And are you going to wait 40 years before you're allowed to be promoted by someone you might actually know more than? a lot of people are saying, no, I'll go start my own business and get it to $1 million or get it to 500,000
It's very
and
encouraging.
not deal with
Yeah.
any of that.
Yeah, so it's occurred to me that there's nobody teaching this. There's nobody teaching you how to do it, or very few people anyway. The colleges tend to frown on this idea of teaching people how to be solopreneurs or freelancers because you take that course and you tend to drop out of college.
True.
But
Or it's hard to sell to parents too, right? Like if you, because I have 4 kids who are going to go to college soon, and you think about what the tuitions are, and then you think, I hope my kid gets a job and they can pay the student loans, right?
Right.
If you say they're going to be a freelancer, parents are not as familiar with that you could actually make better money as a freelancer than in a job, but
Right.
they'll be worried that the kid won't be able to support themselves. So it's a hard sell to the people paying the tuition bills too.
yeah, but the idea of running the business of you, that you're a solopreneur, you're an entrepreneur, that you suddenly you have to learn how to price your services. You have to learn what service you want to offer, what problems you're trying to solve, how to negotiate a deal, how to write a contract, how to set up your accounting books, how to buy insurance for your solopreneur business, how to network with other people, and how to do all of these things. And you have to have such a variety of hats that you're wearing all the time. So it's challenging to be able to do that as an individual, because typically you have skills in certain areas but not skills in other areas. You like to do this kind of work, but you hate doing that kind of work, and so the stuff that you don't like to do tends to suffer that part of the business. And so you need to hire partial people or help others that can help out with that. But it occurs to me that there'd be a huge market for the how-to version of what you're talking about here. And is that where you're going next with all of this?
Well, there's a lot of people teaching this sort of thing, but one of the things I've done since the book came out was when I've done book events, I'll do panels with the entrepreneurs from the book, and if they live in that city where I've been going, and people can actually, and they've pretty much been free. People can talk to them and ask them questions about things. I think a lot of people need to plug into other people in their industry, because there isn't really a cookie cutter, like, this is how you run $1 million one person business in any industry. I could come up with something like that, but it would be so general. It wouldn't really apply. I think, if you're running an e-commerce business, you need to learn from other e-commerce sellers. There are a lot of summits, like there's one in e-commerce called the 7-Figure Seller Summit. And there are different people that work in those fields that are teaching other people how to do things. So I think it's, once you start getting plugged into different podcasts and summits, you can learn a lot of the specifics of
Okay.
doing this. And you also learn about what things people are outsourcing. To your point, Thomas, like, I hate bookkeeping. And I remember it was like a beautiful Saturday. I'm entering all this stuff in QuickBooks. My kids wanted to do something, and I'm getting really mad at myself that I couldn't get it done during the week. Finally, a podcaster actually told me he was using Bench. You just outsource it. It's AI powered. You don't even have to enter anything in QuickBooks. They enter everything for you. It's $200 a month for me. It's so worth it. It is so worth it, because I can make a lot more than $200 in 10 hours of time that I was entering all of that stuff into my QuickBooks, right? So I think you have to look at things that way. And if you're really not going to learn it well, like, I just was never going to learn how to do my books properly. I was not interested in it. I'm a writer. I want to get better at writing. I want to do that stuff. Then as you have revenue coming into the business, you could say, well, I'm going to outsource this one pain point. And then, maybe I could get by updating my own website for a while. But then as the business gets bigger, you could say, well, I'm okay at updating my website, but I actually need a real designer to do this. And, maybe I spend $1,000, get it looking really good. It's well worth it. And that's what I see people doing in these $1 million one person businesses, is they gradually put systems in place for either automation to do things or contractors to do things. And then in tiny business, I'm looking at the ones that have grown a little beyond that, and they have a little team of people that are kind of working together on things. So if they say they outsource a podcast, maybe they have a team of people to record it, to create those little icons, to promote it on social media. Maybe a VA is writing to all the guests to ask them to fill out the bio form and send in a headshot. You guys probably have all this in place.
Yep.
But those are the things that allow people to scale. If they're sitting there slogging through all that work themselves, they burn out and the business won't grow. I mean, a lot of this is like kind of the e-myth, but this is for a digital age, because so much is free and easy now. You don't have to hire employees to do things. And that, you can hire employees. Sometimes it makes sense to do that, but it's certainly not mandatory. And since employees are the biggest cost of many businesses, that democratizes the whole access to starting a business, because you don't need to have a bank loan to fund all those salaries and things. You don't need to raise capital in Silicon Valley, which only a very small demographic is very successful at that. Anybody can do that, get a contractor on Upwork if they start having revenue coming in.
Seems like there might be a niche for somebody who can provide some of this as infrastructure and like guide them through the process. A sort of one-person startup accelerator for $1 million one-person businesses.
There are people, some of the entrepreneurs are doing that. And there's actually been a really interesting trend recently where some of them are going out and raising funds to acquire other $1 million, not technically one person business, but very small, like Amazon businesses, and creating a little stable of them, and then applying their best practices to things like marketing or the back end, the financial side. And maybe they keep on the original entrepreneur as an employee for a while, or they just buy them out and they put their own managers on top of it. But some of them have created little incubators and accelerators for small groups of businesses.
That's really interesting. So one interesting fact you throw into the introduction is just how global the solo entrepreneur is. And as of 2018, 53% of entrepreneurs in Brazil are operating without employees, and 30% of entrepreneurs in Madagascar, of all places, are operating without employees. And if you broaden that out to include the gig economy or the sharing economy, you find that the United States and South Korea and Chile and Israel are all doing quite well. What do you think is driving that trend? So I think we tend to think of entrepreneurship as being a quintessentially American phenomenon. So is this organic? It's cropping up in these countries, or is it maybe the result of American influence abroad?
There's different types of entrepreneurship, and I know what study you got that from. The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Good research. There's necessity-driven entrepreneurship where people need to eat. You know what I mean? And there are no jobs, or something about their life circumstances makes it hard for them to get a job. Maybe they're a mother with small children and they need to bring in an income, but they have to have the children with them when they're working. And then there's opportunity-driven entrepreneurship. So in the US, the European countries, some of the wealthier nations, people will say they started a business because they saw an opportunity. And it's often a combination of the two things. Like, the person sees an opportunity and they are the breadwinner for their family. So they need to start a business that makes real money in order to maintain that responsibility as breadwinner. So it's a lot of different factors rolled into one. But in some of the countries like Madagascar, for instance, I would venture that a lot of people, it's necessity. Maybe they need a job and they're creating their own job.
Yeah, certainly in January when I was in Nigeria, as you drive down the streets, there's lots of people selling things on the streets. And because traffic is terrible there and they have potholes everywhere, traffic does not go very fast. And so that's a perfect environment to get people to change from 3 miles an hour down to 0 and buy something and then resume their 3 mile an hour trek. So that's probably entrepreneurship of necessity out there. And I've seen this in other countries around the world as well. But a lot of enterprising people when push comes to shove.
Well, they're spotting an opportunity and filling a market need, which is the basis of every single business, right? You've got to have something to sell. that people want to buy,
Right.
and or, not just want to buy, but are willing to actually buy it. And so a lot of these folks are very smart. One nice thing is technology is helping them make those businesses easier. There are different apps to help farmers in different countries find out the best price of seeds and things like that. And that's helping people in less developed economies to run more efficient businesses. So that's another area that's going to be really interesting, because the mobile phones are so empowering to people. They don't even need to have a computer to take advantage of technology. And who knows where that's going to lead, right? I think it's a tremendous force for change that we're only beginning to see. I mean, the other thing is political changes sometimes usher in new opportunities. I remember interviewing a woman. She was from a formerly socialist country, and she had won a big entrepreneurship competition, and it was with a social venture. And I said to her, "Oh, well, your parents must be so proud of you, that you won this global competition." And she said, "Well, not really." And I said, "They're not proud of you?" And she said, "Well, they're socialists. They don't know what to tell their friends that I'm a capitalist." I was like, but so you have these new generations, in countries where it wasn't even available. And then, that's going to be interesting too, to see what happens. What is the spin on running a business in countries that didn't embrace capitalism originally?
Yeah, let me tell you about this one business model that I came up with, and actually Trent hates this idea, but it's the idea of in the not too distant future we're going to have video shirts that we're wearing, and so these video shirts will enable people, and these shirts look out as much as other people are looking in. So as you're wearing these video shirts, you will have different advertisement, different messages that are programmed into it. And so it's constantly changing. And so whenever it can detect two eyeballs looking at it, that counts as an impression. And it might pay you 7 cents or 3 cents or 2 cents.
So it's human pop-ups. Yeah.
Yeah. So your job then, as an individual, is to walk around and get noticed as much as possible, and then you have the potential of getting revenue coming in from 1,000 different companies in a single day. And so it's to your advantage to walk around and act like a total jackass and attract attention.
Or be nude in traffic. That would be another
that
thing.
would work too.
Or streak at a baseball game. Yeah, I think civilization would collapse approximately 18 months later.
You know what, Thomas, you're onto something there. There's this whole trend of micro influencers. This is one thing I'm seeing with the e-commerce entrepreneurs. They realize to get Kim Kardashian to, feature their product is going to cost a lot of money on her Instagram feed. So they're going to just everyday people that have 30 followers or 100 followers and asking them to spread the word and giving them little codes and things so that it can be traced back to them, and they make a little bit of money from it, mostly through their social sites. And it's a similar thing, just the average person being a promoter of these brands. And, some people don't want to be a human billboard as, as you might imagine. But I think for people that are already on social media, right, they're putting up their content for free. At least maybe they'll get some money out of it and earn a little extra. So there will probably be some interesting spins on that whole idea of letting everyday people use their influence to help brands grow.
Well, what do I know? Yeah. So you have Elaine's blessing. Well, one thing I'm curious about is how culture interacts with entrepreneurship. So you sort of alluded to this earlier with this young lady who's won a global entrepreneurship country in a competition in a formerly socialist country. So I wonder if you've looked into that at all. Like how does entrepreneurship and solo entrepreneurship cash out in South Korea as opposed to South Africa, as opposed to South Dakota?
There's a study that it's JEDI report. I'm forgetting what it stands for, but it's a global entrepreneurship study. Zoltan Ox, who was at, I think, London School of Economics at the time, he's the guy who runs it. Now he's at Georgetown, and he studies entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. And one of the most interesting things he said to me was the measure of how much a culture prizes entrepreneurship can really be boiled down to, would a mother be happy if her child became an entrepreneur in that country? And I thought that's really brilliant, right?
Yeah.
Because an American mother would think, oh, he'll be the next Mark Zuckerberg or
Right.
someone like that, right? But in some countries, it would be too risky.
Mhm.
And it shows a lot about what the cultural attitudes are, because all mothers care about their children,
Right.
right? They want the best for their children. So if they think this is the best, then the culture probably prizes entrepreneurship. But it's a fluid thing, because so much information is spreading now that maybe wasn't available before to certain cultures as the world opens up more. I mean, one of the other interesting things I found is just in working on tiny business. Some of the entrepreneurs I originally interviewed 2 or 3 years ago, and going back to them, some of them are living in entirely different countries. And I almost wonder if the whole idea of countries is going to go away. I'm wondering if the idea of jobs is going to go away, and if the idea of countries will, because for very young people, borders are very fluid.
Mhm.
Right.
They don't,
Right.
I don't think they buy into that idea that much. They're moving
I've
all
actually
over the
written
place.
about that topic. That
Oh, you have?
yeah, that I see an erosion happening here, and it kind of boils down to this question, the central question: are we relatively better off with more countries in the world or fewer countries in the world? And if we have more countries in the world, then that creates more experimental countries where you can try new things and
Right.
test things out.
We're having somebody on from the Charter City Institute later in the year, a month or two, I think, and that's kind of their whole thing. It's you set up, it's cities, but the idea is it's sort of like a nation state that can experiment with its own laws, and you compete for a tax base. It's so you can have a country that's otherwise totally laissez-faire, but maybe they have like universal health care, or that there are almost no regulations at all, or the state handles almost everything. Like you have this broad range of experimentation, and people just pick where they want to live, and they don't have to operate through the political mechanisms in their country in order to enforce changes they want to see.
Yeah, if you think about an experimental nation state that was just an island down in the Caribbean, if all it offered was cheaper taxes or more freedom, that's probably not a long-term attractor. Something that would attract people long-term. It would probably solve some temporary problems, but you want something that's based on a cause, something that's more long range than just these short-term issues. And so I've played around with this idea that we need global authorities for more and more issues. Like we don't have a global authority for social media right now. We don't have anything that's an overarching authority that can say, no, you can't do that, or set policies or anything. So if you started an individual nation state to do that, that would be their responsibility. You bring the experts from all over the world, a privacy policy group or something like that.
So Elaine's third book could be the one-person $1 million country. Where
Oh my
there-
God. Well,
There you go.
I don't know. One problem with these things is you think about countries evolved for a reason, right? We don't even really know what it was originally, but somehow they took shape, and maybe there's a purpose that we're kind of missing out on. And the
Yeah,
other
that
thing is
was-
all the megalomaniacs. When you think of all the evil dictators in the world,
Yeah.
what would happen with some of these countries, with these experimental countries? Because I don't think human nature has really changed very much.
It all changed in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia. That's in Europe. It solved some of the freedom of religion issues. It solved some of the land issues. But the main thing it did is it recognized one country's ability to sign treaties with another country. And that created what we know today as the nation state. And the nation state is basically what all of our countries are today. And so is that going to last for another 1,000 years, or are we going to have some transition along the way? I doubt it's going to be in place another 1,000 years. So what does the next transition look like, and who causes that to happen?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And what would be what would dictate who lives in which country? Is it, I think a lot of it now is, it's like people's ethnicity, the people that live in that
Right.
one area. But would that be what the glue that holds people together? It would be, people who believe in low government or something like
Right.
that. That's it will be very interesting to see, because what people say and what they actually do are two very different things. That's
Right,
one thing.
exactly.
Yeah, and
I
there's
always watch what they do, not what they say.
there's lots of issues around, do your citizens need to be resident in the country, or can they be virtual citizens? And then China's experimenting with this whole process of gamifying citizenship, which brings up a whole bunch of other possibilities, upsides and downsides. And as countries, most countries are good at punishing people for bad behavior, but they're not good at incentivizing them for good behavior. And so what constitutes good behavior and who gets to
Exactly.
decide that?
Yeah.
It's as tricky as what constitutes bad behavior and who decides who gets punished. So a lot of these issues we're going to continue to wrestle with for thousands of years. So.
It was funny because at one point I was thinking about this whole thing about good behavior versus bad behavior, and I was like, what happened to the women that were really independent like 400 years ago? And then as I was researching it, I came across this article. It was like, oh, they were the witches. They got
Right.
burned. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, you're not cooking in the kitchen, taking care of babies, then you get burned.
Yeah.
So there's a big risk of that the powerful people get to control all the other
Right.
people
Right.
by
right.
being the ones who decide who's good and who's bad.
Yeah. Well, this has been terrific.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to sort of leave our audience with in the closing minutes here?
Yeah, that one nugget that's worth $1 million.
Drop it now.
Well, the one nugget that's worth $1 million is to actually show up for your business if you want to do it. That's one of the things I found in interviewing
yes.
all these entrepreneurs is they're not just visionaries who have a really big idea and dream about it for years and years. They have a bias towards actually doing it and making themselves vulnerable, trying things, not worrying so much if everybody loves it or doesn't love it right out of the starting gate. There's a lot of experimenting, and underneath all the successes, there are also failures, but they keep on going. And no matter what you want to do, whether it's a business or a creative work, you have to show up for it. Viewing it as a practice is a good thing. Where I do yoga and martial arts, and both have this thing in common where you show up on different days, and some days you feel terrible, some days you feel good, and you never know which days it's going to be or which days you're going to have a breakthrough. And a business is like that too. So if you keep showing up, that's a recipe for moving ahead with it, and that's all you can really do.
Yeah. So basically, there's an opening for the world's first unicorn solopreneur.
Yeah.
There's an opening. So
And I want to write about it. So if you are that unicorn,
Get in touch with Elaine. Yeah. Fantastic.
Bitcoin has no employees. And I thought that's kind of, and it's a company. I'm not certain about that. I'm not an expert on crypto, but
Well, there's DAOs as well, distributed autonomous organizations, which are sort of like not even a company at all. It's like an algorithm, but it's kind of set up as a company and theoretically could function as one, and maybe even like hire people, or there could be employees or money made. But so far, none of that's really panned out. But it's definitely an interesting possibility, something to keep your the no employee $1 billion.
oh my gosh,
business.
yeah. Think about that. Then or maybe jobs, companies, and countries
Yeah.
all go away. What an
Yeah.
interesting world that would be.
That
New
would
things
be.
we bring up to organize us, but what would they be? Who
Yeah.
knows? I encourage anybody listening, please feel free to write to me. I'm under my full name, which is in the show notes on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I love hearing from people, and I do write back, and I love to know what you're thinking about, because it makes me a better reporter if I know what questions you have. I know Thomas raised a great point about there not really being a manual on how to create $1 million one-person business, and I'm not going to ever write it, because every business is different, and you'll see from
Yeah.
reading the book that there's a continual learning process that goes into anything, and it's different for every business. That said, I'm willing to provide specifics on things that you might have questions about.
Right.
Yeah, as soon as you write that, then we're going to have the first AI run business. That's $1 million business.
Yeah, that's what I say. Is
Yeah,
the $1 million no person business.
Yeah, and then the AI run country. We'll have the AI run countries as well. So
We've got books for you to write for the rest of your life. There.
yeah,
I love it. I love it, Will. I always have good ideas.
yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This was fun.